But just kind of give you an idea of how Virginia has evolved. Prior to the 1960s, if you look for services for people with intellectual disabilities particularly, and also for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, you'd find most folks would either be living at home with no services, or they'd be living in one of two state-operated institutions prior to the 60s. One in Lynchburg, Central Virginia Training Center, and the other in Petersburg, which is South Virginia Training Center. And long about 1970s, along with many other states that operated these kind of institutions, Virginia got involved with the Medicaid program and began to fund the institutions through the Medicaid program. And with that, they also began to develop 3 new training centers in the 70s, designed to be smaller. Now, it's interesting that even then, when they designed these 3 new training centers, that's when they also started changing the name to training center, and they really had the idea that these would be training centers, that people would come, learn things, and move on. Back in the early days of the 70s, with Southeastern Virginia Training Center, many people were living there and also going into the community quite a bit, and either had jobs or other kinds of things. But then things began to change, the population changed, and folks began to go into these places and staying there. So really, even though some of this new thinking was beginning to start in the 70s, it just didn't quite take hold very well. Basically, when you build something that large, it winds up becoming something that you may not have intended. So, by the early 1970s, we had over 5,000 people living in these institutions. And also, what began to happen in the 1970s, actually it started with a statute in 1968, the Community Services Board system was started. And so during the 70s, we began to see the development of the Community Services Board throughout the Commonwealth. And basically how that got started, and I was part of 2 of them that as they were formed, one in Piedmont, and the other in Chesterfield. Basically, interested parties in a community would say, you know, there is this new avenue, and we have this need, let's go ahead and get this formed. Most of these were formed through county governments, either a combination of county governments joining together, or one county setting up the board and just becoming a department of that county. So these began to develop during the 1970s, and that began the establishment of some community-based systems for individuals as to offer those kind of opportunities. And all that was state-funded, 100% state-funded at that point in time. There were the beginning development of some Medicaid-funded group homes as well during that time. But it wasn't until 1991, with the beginning of the waiver system, the ID waiver, that we began to start the more robust funding of the community-based system under the Medicaid waiver for persons with intellectual disabilities. And this gave many more options for people as an alternative to the institutional placement. Then throughout the 1990s, the Department of Justice began to look into our facilities that we were state-operated facilities under the CRIPA. And CRIPA is a civil rights for institutionalized persons, and so those investigations began through the 1990s. In 2008, the Department of Justice went to the Central Virginia Training Center and began its investigation under CRIPA. And then in 2010, they expanded that to look into all 5 of the training centers that we have. I don't know, are you all familiar with where our training centers are located? Marissa knows. Yeah, one in Northern Virginia, Northern Virginia Training Center, one in Southwestern Virginia, in Hillsville, Southwest Virginia Training Center, the one in Lynchburg, Central Virginia Training Center, one in Petersburg, South Virginia Training Center, and one down in Tidewater, Chesapeake, Southeastern Virginia Training Center. At that point in time, in 2010, our census in the training centers had dropped down to 1,000.